I don't wanna be the boy that runs in the back. I don't wanna be the kid that falls in the dark. All I really want to be is a guy that gets that girl.
Welcome to the AJ Steele Show. We discuss politics, sex, money, and everything in between. And now, here's your host, an immigrant, a self-made millionaire, an American, AJ Steele.
Everything I say and do, I'm just not good enough for you. I don't wanna be the boy.
Welcome to another episode of the AJ Steele Show. Today we have a knockout interview with Professor Gregory Borse of the University of Arkansas. Yes, he is a college professor and he does teach philosophy and literature, but he's nothing like the stuffy old liberal professors most of us had in college. Not only is he not stuffy, but he happens to be an outspoken conservative who doesn't seem to mind ruffling a few feathers or stepping on some toes, which is entirely refreshing and almost unheard of these days. Finding an outspoken conservative professor who teaches college is almost as rare as finding a unicorn in a rainbow-colored field. But we did find a unicorn of professors, and he will be coming on with us in a few minutes. But before we get to him, I wanted to answer a couple of recurring questions that I get from a lot of listeners and social media friends. So many people are asking me why I haven't done a show about the results of the midterm elections. And my answer is very simple. There's nothing I can say about them that hasn't been said by anybody else in the media, with a podcast or with a newspaper column. My general feeling is that the old school country club globalist GOP conspired with the Democrats to sabotage conservative Republican candidates because they hate Donald Trump. This entire election was engineered by the elites of both political parties to destroy Donald Trump and to finish off the MAGA movement for good. And I'm not entirely sure that they didn't succeed. Look, I don't buy any of the talk about our side running poor candidates because it's simply irrelevant. As unlikable as Dr. Oz was, for example, you really want to tell me that he was a worse candidate than that fat, lazy slob, that socialist who suffers from serious brain damage? And how about Carrie Lake? You want to tell me that she was a worse candidate than that sing-songy liberal moron who didn't even have the nerve or decency to debate her? Give me a freaking break. It was never about the candidates. It was all about an apathetic, drugged-out American populace, a good percentage of which is totally dependent on the government. Not to mention that the rest of America was completely manipulated by the media, and the fact that we have a voting system which at the least favors establishment Democrats, and at the most steals elections at will. In many ways, the Democratic Party has perfected the art of winning elections through its various tentacles and mechanisms. It's almost like stealing candy from a baby at this point. And I absolutely warned you about this. I told you that if we don't find a way to correct and outlaw all the shenanigans that happened in 2020, this election nonsense will continue on from now until the end of time. That's it. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's exactly what we're doing. Now, another question I keep getting asked is, what are my thoughts on the war brewing between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis? Now, I personally like both of them, and I have not taken a side yet. But I will say that I am disgusted by so many disloyal so-called conservative pundits in the media who jumped ship without taking the time to remember that Trump has been mercilessly attacked by every conceivable side from the very day that he announced that he was running for president, right until today. And 99% of those attacks proved to be absolutely false. Let me tell you a little personal story about something that is very relevant to what is happening right now. When I was 30 years old, I thought I knew everything, but in reality, I was very young and very green. But despite that fact, an old Irish billionaire decided to hire me to run his corporation anyway. Like I said, I was very green, and as a young administrator, I used to jump to conclusions and overreact to every perceived attack or problem like it was the end of the world. So my wise old Irish boss called me to his office. He always had a few bottles of whiskey under his desk, and he always had this ruddy complexion and a bit of a slur in his speech. But he was one of the smartest folks I've ever met. And so here I am, 30 years old, sitting in his office, worried about my future, stressed out about work. And he told me something that I never forgot. Well, first of all, he actually said, "Calm down." But then he said, and I still remember his booming voice, he said, "AJ, Don't be hasty with your words or decisions. If you are patient, then the answers to your questions will become clear, and you'll find that most of your problems solve themselves. This old man is long gone now, but I took his advice, and I've used it in everything I've done since, and he was right. It's his advice that helped my life along, and it's his advice that led me to retire at 45. And it's that same exact advice which I'm offering to all of you out there if you're not sure about Trump or DeSantis. Patience. Okay, it's time for our first break, but I would like to say a special thank you to all of our wonderful listeners who made our show reach the top 40 in the ratings in 3 different continents. Yes, this week we were top 40 in North America, Asia, and Australia, which is completely unbelievable considering that we're independent, we're commercial free, and we're 100% honest all of the time. So thank you again, and I hope you stick around for a very interesting interview with Professor Gregory Borse, which will cover the future of our youth and also touch on the state of our liberal college system. This is AJ Steele, and you're listening to the AJ Steele Show.
All I really want to be is the guy that gets the girl.
The AJ Steele Show. Think of your loudmouth best friend, hated by all the wives, because he tells it just like it is.
Finally see your love belongs to me.
Gregory Borse, welcome to the AJ Steele Show. It's so nice to finally have a chance to speak to you in person. I know that you have a lot of things to tell us, so let's start at the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me, AJ. It's really nice to meet you. I am a tenured professor, associate professor at the University of Arkansas in Monticello. I've been teaching at the college level since 1987. I think I started when I was working on my master's, back when I was driving a motorcycle and 23 years old and didn't know anything. And my academic career took me from the University of Missouri at Columbia, where I thought I had wanted to go into journalism, transferred to a small Catholic liberal arts school that really gave me my foundation in the classic liberal arts. That was the University of Dallas. And I got my bachelor's and my master's degree there. And that's where I met my bride, who I've been married to for 32 years, going on 33. Then I went down to LSU. We did everything backwards. We dated while we were in grad school. We got married. We had our first child. We have 5 children, 4 of them grown, the youngest a junior in high school. And then I got accepted into the PhD program at LSU. So we transferred, sold all our furniture, and went down there and lived in what we called Soviet Cell Block C, married student housing, right under the shadow of the LSU's Tiger Stadium. And I really loved my time there. And that was in the 90s. And I think for the kinds of things that you wanted to talk about, I hit the sweet spot on doing my PhD in English and taking all these literary theory and philosophy courses at that time, because a lot of what we're seeing going on in the culture today and at the university level and at public schools was being cooked up, in the very halls where I was taking classes. And I remember thinking while I was there, wow, this is going to be really interesting. And here we are. And a lot of the things that I kind of predicted in a loose way are coming to pass today. So it's been a ride.
So I read a bit of your biography, and you're a devout Catholic and you're a conservative and a professor. Isn't that a bit of an oxymoron these days?
It is. I'm a bit of a contrarian. I decided, I studied literature because I loved it. I thought about majoring in philosophy. I didn't major in philosophy, but I took a lot of philosophy at the master's and the PhD level. But I ended up going with literature because I loved it. And because I think that literature is probably the most rich source in the arts, or one of them anyway, that can reveal to us, really important truths about the human condition. And nowadays, now that I've been teaching for so long, I tell my students, and I teach world literature, I teach philosophy, I teach all the philosophy courses except for one, and I teach film. And I'm always trying to encourage my students to learn to read the landscape, and they are at a huge deficit when they get to me nowadays. But you're right. In my profession, I decided, well, I wanted to be in the academy because it was so tilted against things that I think are really, really important for one generation to pass on to the next generation.
So when did you start teaching at the University of Arkansas?
I started about, I want to say 2013, say.
So you've done this for a couple of years. Can you tell me what kind of students you've been teaching in the past 5 years? And in your opinion, are they different than the college kids of, say, 10, 20 years ago?
Absolutely. When I first started teaching college in Dallas, in the Dallas County Community College District while I was a grad student, there was a little bit of an entitlement mentality among students at the community college level. And it expressed itself with the attitude that, hey, I paid for this class. I should at least get a C.
Of course.
When I got to LSU and I was teaching as a graduate student there, that entitlement had ticked up to, and this is in the 90s, to, hey, I paid for this class or my parents paid for this class. I should at least get an A. Thankfully, that expectation at a place like the University of Arkansas at Monticello, which is a small college, about 3,000 students, we do offer some graduate degrees. So I do teach in the MFA program and in the MA program too. But we're also an open admissions university. We're in the southeast corner, very rural part of the state. And so we get a lot of kids who didn't think that they were college material. And then we get some who are kind of savvy because they realize, the faculty at the University of Arkansas where I teach, we all have the same resumes as all of the faculty at Fayetteville, which is the flagship school. So they can come here for, 2/3 the cost. The entitlement mentality is not as pronounced today, I'm happy to report. But the level of preparedness, it has just gotten worse and worse and worse. And I have decided that that's not a bug, it's a feature.
Very interesting. So I want to jump into something I wasn't going to ask you yet, but I will. Let's talk a little bit about affirmative action. What are your opinions about it as it relates to college admissions and overall results for students of all color?
I think it's bad. I think it ends up, ironically, we've got these two cases before the Supreme Court right now, right? University of North Carolina and Harvard, right? And if you think about it, you say we can weight these kids' applications. Let's use Harvard as our example, right?
Sure.
Well, where are the vast majority of minority candidates coming from that are applying to Harvard? They're not coming from Arkansas. They're not coming from Iowa. They're coming from Manhattan. They're coming from, the East. They're coming from kids who might be minorities on paper, but who already come from an extraordinarily privileged background in the first place. So I think it's a little bit false to say, in the interest of having a diverse campus, we need to level the playing field because you're choosing among applicants who have huge advantages in the first place. So with affirmative action, I think it damages. I wish we could. I don't like the new language that there is no such thing as color blindness. I'm a dinosaur enough that I think that people ought to be judged on the content of their character and on nothing else. And I'm old enough to believe in meritocracy. I think it's good.
Well, you're sounding a little bit like a modern version of Martin Luther King. But let me ask you, have you had any kind of pushback from your administration to level the playing field? I hear a lot of that from other college professors.
Well, here's the interesting thing. Since we're at an open admissions university, if you apply, you get in. And then and what's charming about that to me, and I don't mean that in a bad way, is that our mentors at the University of Dallas said, when you're in the classroom and you're doing that sacred thing that we call teaching, it's not a business. You have to teach the students that appear in your class, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what their backgrounds are. And I really believe in that firmly. So in one sense, when I graduated from LSU, my dissertation director, who graduated from Yale and Harvard, said that he thought I would really be happiest at a small liberal arts college like the University of Dallas. And I remember being a little bit crestfallen, like, oh, you don't think I can compete? You know what I mean? At the big tier one universities. But it's taken me a lifetime of teaching to realize that, one, wherever you go, there you are. These institutions are not very different from each other at all. And that's the fault of the academy. And he was right. I would have been miserable at larger places where I would be having to do frontline fighting of these things on a daily basis. Whereas when you're at a place like the University of Arkansas, I'm really free. I am a contrarian. Everybody on campus knows. People do tilt progressive. You know what I mean?
Of course.
They know that I'm the guy, but they also see that I'm a happy person and I don't pick fights and I don't hold grudges. You know, I think I've lost every single argument that we've had with the administration or on campus about anything. And people are puzzled by me because it doesn't depress me. I'm like, well, I lost that argument. That's the way it should go. Let's have a vigorous debate. And if the faculty votes that we should do this, well, then I lost.
Well, I like your attitude. It's a very positive attitude, and especially being a conservative in a university system, which is usually tilted the other way. Let me get back to the kids again. Do you get a sense that kids today, and I know I'm sounding like a crotchety old man, but do you think they're still thinking for themselves, or have they become a part of this huge politically correct groupthink type reality?
Yeah, I honestly think the latter is the case. I think you're right about that. And what I meant by saying that it's a bug, not a feature, is that my students appear and they have lived their entire lives under the delusion that smartphone in their hand is access to any information they could possibly need. This has ruined their memories.
True.
And that's exactly what Socrates said about writing in the first place. Writing was going to cause human beings to lose their memories. And we're seeing it today in the form of the smartphone. But I used to ask this question, and this is interesting. I used to ask my students 10, 12, 15 years ago, do you believe everything you see on the internet? And they would all say, oh, no. And my anecdote back then was that I was standing in line and there was a very much older gentleman at the grocery store. And I heard him say, oh, no, I know it's true because I saw it on the internet. And I remember chuckling internally to myself that, oh, my gosh, you know what I mean? But he came from a generation where if you read it in the newspaper, it was true. And that has all changed. Now I ask the question and they still answer me in the negative. And I tell them, no, you actually do believe everything on the internet. And they say, what do you mean? And I said, because if you don't know anything and you look it up on Wikipedia, you believe it. And I said, you have no way of vetting information. And I find this supremely ironic because the big push in public schools and in universities for 20 years now has been critical thinking. And it has robbed our students of the ability of critical thinking because it has not also been accompanied by filling up their brains with knowledge. And those are two different things. My students don't know anything. I ask them questions and I tell them, I say, I feel bad for you because the internet has substituted for the possession. Their relationship to knowledge is completely mercenary.
You know, who was it? Bob Dylan, who said you shouldn't let other people get your kicks for you.
Yeah.
It's almost like they lost their natural curiosity. And to tell you the truth, I think we're all a little bit at fault and we all suffer from it a bit because we all use those phones. But society, at least modern society, has always had some type of a media. You know, there was maybe 3 networks at some point. Now there's a million networks.
Right.
The truth was always kind of controlled by a certain group, don't you think?
Well, yes, it was. But the market, and this is why I love the market, you know, the market's never wrong, even when it's wrong. And I love the free market because it's always telling you the truth about human behavior. When we only had 3 or 4 networks, there was still a market that demanded that what they offered for our consumption could be verified as factual and true, right? Because it costs money to put on ABC Nightly News. It costs money to put out the New York Times, right? But the internet has flipped everything upside down. Now information is absolutely free. And we've gotten into an information war, which is exactly where the Marxists wanted us to be at this point. And we can get into that if you want to. That's just my theory about things. You know, you read the landscape saying, if I add these guys and these guys and these things that happen in culture, then I'm not surprised that we are where we are. But yeah, take COVID for an example. My students were absolutely confused by the contradictory information that they were getting from 24 different sources in media, and they shut down. I felt so bad for them because they honestly did not know what to think. They didn't know who to believe, you know, and that's partly where we are as a result of social media.
So I guess you're saying that even the misinformation is a part of the plan. It's very interesting. I still think that there's a general control of most of the stuff that we hear, and I don't think the voice of the opposition is getting heard at all. Wow, what a great conversation we're having. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to take a short break, so I'm going to take it right now, and the AJ Steele Show will be right back.
You're listening to the AJ Steele Show, where no topic is off limits, no discussion too harsh, no truth more true. The AJ Steele Show. We tell it like it is.
All I really want to be is a guy that gets the girl. All I really want to be.
Welcome back to the AJ Steele Show. We're here with Professor Gregory Borse of the University of Arkansas. Gregory, we talked a lot about the students, but now we have to start asking some questions about their teachers. The eternal question is, who came first, the chicken or the egg? So university administrators and faculty, they've grown more radical every year. And it seems to me that many of them are nothing but moral cowards who bend over backwards not to offend these snowflakes. But some people say that it's the teachers and the colleges who turn their students into zombies. Look, a lot of intelligent folks in the conservative world feel that it's our school systems and universities which indoctrinated these kids with vile leftism, and dare I say, communism, Marxism, whatever you want to call it. So which one is it? Which came first?
I honestly think it's let's call the institution the chicken. And that's what I meant by saying that it's a feature, not a bug. Because the war started, really in the 60s, right? In the late 60s. Marxism, with the agitation with Vietnam, this is just in my view, from the 80s through the 90s and the early aughts. You notice in the United States, we were witnessing politically a war between the two factions of the decade of the 60s, one represented by the Bushes and the other one represented by the Clintons. And, the radicals against the 1950s style, or at least appearing, right? But they've melded into what one commentator recently I heard called the uniparty, and I believe that. But the institutions themselves indoctrinated the kids because they were following and this is the roots of critical race theory. An Italian thinker named Gramsci disagreed with the Lenin faction of Marxists early in the 20th century and thought coercion and force is not the way to establish our utopian society. We have to do it through replacing the dominant hegemony of society.
True.
And then, a German thinker in the 1960s who was not aware of Gramsci, because Gramsci was not well known until the mid 70s, said that what Marxism needed was a long march through the institutions. And Marcuse picked up on that, and he said, that's absolutely what we need. So what you're referring to is that long march. And that long march absolutely went through the elite schools, through the graduate schools. And it's funny to me because I'm in the humanities. And so the attitude about the humanities in culture and at state legislatures is, oh, those guys, they just do the soft stuff. They just do the, you know what I mean? They're just navel gazing. And you dismiss the humanities at your peril because CRT was invented in literary theory and leaked over into law schools. And now we have people complaining about prosecutors who are letting criminals out of jail on a daily basis. They've all been schooled in this, and it was just cooked up. And I was watching it happen in the 1990s and becoming very aware of it and like, wow, this is amazing.
Look, I don't have any issues with humanities. I don't have any issues with arts. I love the arts and the humanities, but it's not a concrete science. Neither is the law, by the way, because even the law is up to interpretation. I know we're talking about teachers and professors, and it seems like you do believe that they have a serious culpability in what we're witnessing right now. But I always start with the parents myself. So I'm a father of 4, you're a father of 5, so we've had our share of fun. I always felt that the responsibility for a child's upbringing and morality starts and ends at home. Are the parents abdicating their duties and just passing the buck and blaming the professors?
Well, that's interesting because I think that they do bear responsibility for this. So let's take a look at the other half of what's been going on. You can have the secret Marxist, they've got a strategy, they have a tactics book, they know what they're doing. And it was to get into the institutions, not to ruin those institutions, but to slowly learn what those institutions of capitalism could teach them about how to run the world and then transform them, which I think you're seeing in big tech. But on the other side of things, my generation, I'm one of the Generation X OGs, original gangsters. And it was my Generation X that I started noticing among my own generation that these were the first ones that started saying, it's really making Johnny feel bad that he didn't win the race and he doesn't get a ribbon. So let's give everybody a ribbon. And in 1991, Al Franken, of all people, he invents a character on SNL called Stuart Smalley, and he's making fun of this affirmation society that we've turned into, where we've got to be bolstered and held up all the time. And then in the mid 90s, a Japanese toy appeared on the market called a Yamaguchi. Do you know what that is?
I remember those, yes.
And I remember being really puzzled by them. I'm like, why would anybody want to carry around a little machine that would tell them what to do and then they do it? And now I'm living in an age where everybody's got one of those machines in their hands. And, Netflix just aired Social Dilemma last year. It's terrifying. It's a documentary interview with former high ups at Google, Twitter, and Facebook who won't let their own children be on the internet or have smartphones. They're like, this is social engineering. This is what all of this is for. And I've told my students, I'm like, you carry around those phones. It substitutes for your brain. It tells you that you're great all the time. And then you turn into somebody who, when I disagree with you, you think that means that I'm calling you stupid. And I'll tell them, hey, I don't argue with stupid people because that wouldn't be nice. If I argue with you, I'm telling you that you're intelligent. And so I'm trying to disabuse as many of my students as I can of this sort of go along, get along with the masses. And of course, normal people have a psychological need to belong. And the path of least resistance is to go with the mob. I try to stand. That's why I went into the institutions myself, because I'm like, these college students need to be hearing something different. And I tell my students all the time, what you should hope for is that you go to a college where all of your faculty members are telling you absolutely contradictory things with smiles on their faces. And that was the LSU that I went to. The English department that I was a grad student in had professors from Harvard, Yale, UC Berkeley, Columbia, University of Chicago. You know what I mean? In fact, somebody teased me one time. They were like, why didn't you go to an Ivy League school? I said, because I wanted an Ivy League education. And I got the last generation of real thinkers out of those schools. I was like, I wouldn't send my kids to an Ivy League school to save their lives right now because they're getting nothing but everything's the same.
Well, we're going to get to that in a few minutes. I do find interesting your whole concept of how communism, instead of being a revolutionary type thing, 1917 and, Bolsheviks, they worked their way into our system. Now, I went to college in San Francisco in the 90s, and they were already going full on with their anti-American BS and with the race baiting. And every week I saw protesters out there with goofy signs. All men are rapists. Zionism is Nazism. White people are the oppressors. It was almost like these students, their whole existence in college centered on activism. And back then, my buddies and I, we used to laugh at them. Yeah. There were these goofy girls with, underarm hair and piercings, and they were hanging out with a bunch of dirty hippie dudes smoking pot and hoping to get laid. Not to mention that there was a Palestinian contingent completed with Muslim headscarves and the Pan-African kids wearing African pride shirts. But you know what? I'm not laughing anymore. These morons whom we used to mock are now running the Democratic Party and the media. Think about AOC and Rashida Tlaib and pretty much... Yeah, right.
For all of our elite institutions, they're running them as well. And what's interesting is that, along with this philosophically, we had the grand epistemological turn in modern philosophy, which is skeptical that you can actually know anything. And we have the notion that all truth is subjective. And then we feed our kids, I've said this before, for my whole life, or not my whole life, but for my kids' lives, they've been told that it is impolite to disagree, that all values and all cultures and belief sets are equal to each other. Well, any thoroughgoing 12-year-old is going to say, if they're all equal, that means they're equally valueless. And why would my parents be silly enough to choose one? But the other thing that it has caused is this, what I call mass cognitive dissonance. The fact that you mentioned the Palestinians, say, or you mentioned the fact that feminists have not come out en masse to condemn the way women are treated in Iran is, to me, appalling, morally appalling. Or the way women are treated in China, the fact that boys are more valued culturally than girls. So the performances of abortion are 90%, 99% of girls. And so I feel like this is put everybody in one sense, and I shouldn't laugh about it, in this weird kind of fugue state, because when they hit a roadblock where these two ideas cannot be reconciled with each other, and I've heard people say things blithely like, well, if that's the way they, like under Saddam Hussein in Iraq, well, if that's the way they want to live, that's their choice. And I'm like, you don't know any. It's, Santayana said what? He said, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. I think we live in an age where those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it and not even know it, which is more dangerous.
Well, that's the whole issue with moral equivalencies, I think, that you're bringing up. But it's also kind of related to what you're saying earlier, that all of us are winners. All of us are special. Well, we're not. We're not all winners and we're not all special. And there's no moral equivalency. There's right and there's wrong. And it's always been that way. And I can start talking about the Bible and scripture. And I'm not a deeply religious man, but I definitely respect the morality and the ethics that the Bible teaches us. So, everything is up for grabs these days.
Exactly. And part of the problem in the institutions, and I've said this to my peers and my friends, and I'm friends across the boards with progressives, with conservatives, with libertarians, because I'm a product of UD's slogan is a Catholic university for independent thinkers. And so what I loved about it was that it wasn't jamming Catholicism down anybody's throat. It wasn't making anybody feel bad if they didn't go to mass. It was offering you a solid foundation, and it defends itself. A few years ago, one of my former schoolmates, who is now transgender, agitated to have a biology professor fired from the University of Dallas because he had the audacity to say that sex is biological. And the university, I was so proud of the university. They put out a statement 2 days later after the controversy had flared up and said, no, we do not punish people for what they say. And we're not going to, kowtow to the mob here. But even at my own university, before COVID, we went through a very short period where we did have some agitating students that were trying to get professors in trouble by weaponizing Title IX. You remember when the Obama administration changed the definition. So I got brought up on Title IX charges, and it was because a self-identifying feminist student didn't like that I criticized some feminists. So when I went to the kangaroo court that they convened, I said, why am I here? And they said, well, the Office of Civil Rights has said that we have to take every complaint seriously. I said, but this doesn't fall under Title IX. Feminism is not a religion. It's not a sexual orientation, and it's not former military service. It's an ideology. So unless they want to apply to be recognized as an institutionalized religion, I don't think we need to have further conversation.
But this is the issue, Gregory. The fact that a university even has to defend somebody who's talking about biology, okay, about XX and XY, that shows how far we have fallen. The fact that you have to defend that you dared challenge a feminist philosophy, I mean, you should be able to have an opinion. So we've reached a point that we're stifled. Professors are stifled. People at work are stifled. Politicians are scared to say what needs to be said. I think that we've reached a very dangerous trend when the whole concept, as empirical as the truth, has become subjective.
A.J. Steele. Not right, not left, just right.
Welcome back to the A.J. Steele Show. We're talking with Professor Borse, and our conversation left off when I was just telling you how concerned I am about the fact that the truth has now become subjective.
Exactly. And this is one of the reasons why I told you that, I was one among 3 professors in Arkansas who sued our own board of trustees because they expanded the number of terms for terminating a tenured professor for cause from like 5 things, which were the traditional boilerplate things you expect, to like about 18. And they were so ambiguous, it was dangerous. And this is happening all over the country. And I need my conservative counterparts to understand why tenure needs to be protected. And it has to do with free speech. Now, we lost, but the argument was this. 1, you can't change a contract unilaterally that you've already entered into with an individual without their participation. So that was number 1. But what I pointed out to our attorneys, because they couldn't quite wrap their mind around it, was I said the whole function of this change of definition is to tell me to shut up. Because in order for me to do my job, I have to do it through speech. If I teach, I'm speaking. If I'm serving on a committee, I'm speaking. If I am writing journal articles, that's a form of speech. I said, so the whole point of this is to warn me that if I say the wrong thing under the wrong administration, I could be punished for it. And I said, that has a chilling effect. Now, you guys might not think it's very important in the humanities, but it has a chilling effect on cancer research. And cancer doesn't care about what your politics are. And so they need to understand that tenure needs to be protected. Because look, in the West, there are only 3 different professions that are offered the robe. Those are judges, members of the clergy, and professors, because all those positions, importantly, need to be able to function without coercion. And it is denigrating to all of us when we create a system where everybody all the time has to look over their shoulder or worry about whether when they speak, they're going to be punished.
Well, I think that tenure is a double-edged sword, and this is for another discussion possibly, because as you know, there's a lot of incompetents out there that are supported by tenure. So it's kind of a toughie,
I understand that criticism, and it's accurate.
Now, a while back, I did a show that ended up being one of our most popular programs where I concluded that college is overrated and it's not necessary for every single person to attend it. I believe that college has become nothing but a huge money-making enterprise or a scam, if you want to call it what it really is. And I think that half the kids who go are wasting their time and their parents' money. They should be in a vocational program or out in the world finding their way instead of getting a degree in some stupid transgenderism in 21st century America.
Right.
Or a degree in modern African dance. And yes, I made those up, but I'm sure they exist somewhere. So
I'm sure they do. I'm sure I could probably write a fake literary theory paper on one of those and submit it and get it published. Look, I agree with you. I had the audacity at one of our assembly meetings a few years ago to stand up, in a group of faculty, administrators, and staff and say, hey, guys, don't forget, college is voluntary. We should be weeding out the students that shouldn't be here in the first 2 years. And they looked at me with horror in their faces because it's all about student retention. I think that the biggest sort of boondoggle about higher education was this. State legislatures have been sold on the idea that college really is just a state-sponsored glorified jobs trainings program. And it should not be that. There are plenty of trades and professions that do not require this. And we have denigrated our fellow citizens who've opted to go and decide to learn how to tear down a transmission and rebuild it by hand. And a few years ago, one of my best friends here in Monticello, she was named the Arkansas Teacher of the Year. And she got to go to Obama's White House. She was up for Teacher of the Year in the United States. She didn't get that, but it was this huge honor. When she was interviewed with the 2 other finalists, they asked the question, what do you think the biggest problem in education was? And when she came back, she told me, she said, I lost it today. They're not going to pick me. And I said, why? And she said, because my answer was the biggest flaw in education is that we keep selling college as the be all end all for everybody in high school. And it's not true. And I said, Kim, you didn't just lose it. If they have any integrity, you just won it. And she did win it.
Wow.
And for a state like Arkansas, it's really, really important. But one of the things that has happened, both in higher education and at state legislatures, is that the education, what do we want to call it? It's not a lobby. The schools of education they absolutely own all of the accrediting bodies of higher education and of public schools. And so when a state legislature who has no background in education goes up to the state legislature in Little Rock and has to be, tutored in what we need to do in our schools, the only voices that they're not hearing from me, because I would tell them something quite different. They're only hearing from that smaller subset, and these subsets all tend to be progressive. And frankly, for my whole life, they've simply been making up theories and then conducting scientific experiments on our children, and they fail, and then they replace them with a new one.
I think that it's beyond progressivism. I think it's big business, really. In my opinion, my humble opinion, a lot of bachelor's degrees and even master's degrees mean very little these days, because the scholarship that gets them there is not as rigorous as it used to be, and because most of the degrees lead to a job at Starbucks or a government job at best.
This is what makes me stick out. Like, I did everything wrong, AJ, in my career. So like I said, my wife and I, we got married and had our first child before we were finished with our masters. Then we finished. Then I worked in the world. You know what I mean? And I had to feed my family. So I went out and I was an account manager for a spine clinic for 4 years. I was teaching in community college. Then when I got to LSU, I signed a contract because LSU paid me to get my PhD that said I wouldn't have an outside job. And I had to go to my dissertation director and said, look, we can't afford to eat. You guys are only paying me $10,000 a year. My wife is really the one that is bringing home the bacon right now. He said, look, if you make straight A's and you don't miss any classes, nobody's going to blink if you get an outside job. So later, when I was down there, at one point, I was the principal of a private Catholic school, a graduate student at LSU, and a bartender at the same time. And none of those three worlds could meet. But what that has done for me, happily, and this is why I'm a happy warrior, is that I'm not that professor that you get in college who went straight out of high school to a BA into a PhD program and now is a professor. I've done things and I've been places, and I come from a background, I was the first kid in my family. I come from a family of 9 children. Oh, and wow. I was the first. My parents didn't finish college. I was the first one in my family to finish college. I had to pay for it on my own. I got into ridiculous student debt that I'm trying really hard. And as a living example of what you were talking about, both of my sons came to the university where I taught. I told them not to. I said, you do not want to be at UAM where your dad is one of the most popular professors. It's going to drive you crazy. And they both hated it, not specifically because I was there. But I asked my son, Eamon, when he came to me, he was miserable. I said, what do you want to do? And I said, your mother and I are in education, but we just want you all to be happy.
True.
And we want you to be productive and successful. And he said, well, I'd really like to make this rock band a go. And I said, how old are you? He said, 20. I said, well, don't wait until you're 40. That'd make you a loser. Go. And you know what? He just got certified in Arkansas as he just passed his boards. He's a barber.
Oh, good for him.
He's responsible for this great hair.
You got wonderful hair.
Yeah.
Wonderful hair.
In fact, on my Instagram, the only thing I post are pictures of my hair.
He's the singing barber since he's a rock and roller.
Exactly.
Huh?
And he got hired by the trendiest barbershop in Bentonville, which is where all the Walmart money is. So he's happy as a clam. My other son, Liam, he went through the same thing. He hated it. I said, what do you want to do, son? He said, I think I want to join the Marines.
Good for
I
him.
said, then go. And he did. And he's a corporal in the Marines now. And it was the best thing in the world. And now that he's realized that he's got the GI Bill and can go to college for free, he said, Dad, I really want to go to college. I want to know things. And I'm like, good. Well, then when your stint's done, let's talk about that. And he said, I want to major in history, but I can only teach? I said, no. My roommate in graduate school, Bob Kelly, I don't think he would mind my telling you this story. He got his PhD. He got married. His wife got pregnant. He couldn't find a job at a tier 1 research institution. He was living up in Seattle. And he called me because my wife and I did everything backwards. We had kids. We were doing life and grad school at the same time. And he was finished. I was not finished. And he said, what should I do? I'm working in a lumber yard. I'm Dr. Kelly, and I'm in a lumber yard, and I hate it. And I said, well, Bob, go to a temp agency. So he went to a temp agency, and he's in Seattle. Guess where he landed? He landed at Microsoft.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. And now 5 years ago, he just retired at the age of 50 as the vice president of marketing for Microsoft worldwide. And now he is a venture capitalist.
Wow.
And so when people ask me, what can you do with a philosophy major or a history major, I say, short of practicing law or medicine, anything you want. But that still does not mean, like, I came into this profession because this is really what animates me. What I did is I figured out how to trick the state of Arkansas into paying me to do what I would be doing if I was a homeless, crazy person living on the streets. I'd still be talking about philosophy, film, literature, and culture. That's what I'd be doing. So I just worked. That was my plan. But I agree with you. I think what we need to do is reevaluate how we can help students get into the trades and in the professions when that's really what they want to do, and stop making them feel bad because they're not college bound.
And that's exactly where I'm coming from. And I want to make very clear that I have nothing against people studying the humanities or philosophy. But the problem is that there's too many people going to college who don't have a special talent, and they're wasting time and they're wasting money. There's people in music programs who have no business being in music programs. In the old days, if you were talented, you got accepted to Juilliard or Berkeley School of Music, etc. Or if you were a bright philosopher, you got accepted as a philosophy student. These days, there's too many people there with zero talent, zero aptitude for learning, who could serve themselves much better out there in the real world, working and making a good living, instead of wasting 2 or 4 or 6 or even 8 years of their lives in college, and then leaving with a huge debt and nothing really to show for it, other than a stupid diploma.
All I really want to be is the guy that gets the girl.
The AJ Steele Show. Think of your loudmouth best friend, hated by all the wives, because he tells it just like it is.
Finally see your love belongs to me.
Welcome back to the last portion of our interview with Professor Gregory Borse. So a while back, I remember reading about NGOs in nations like China and Saudi Arabia and even Russia that were donating millions into student groups and giving out special grants and endowments to university departments and even paying to start new ones. What kind of an effect do you think all this foreign money has had on our universities?
Again, I think it has hoodwinked a lot of well-meaning administrators into seeing an opportunity for funding where it otherwise did not exist. And this is just, it's simple bribery, because this is part of the communist long march. I mean, Deutschke used the term long march because he wanted to reference the communist long march across China. And he said, we need to do the same thing in the West by marching through the institutions. And what better way to do that than with money? And so we have these China institutes that are bribing schools into allowing them on campus, where they are completely taught by Communist Party members from China, who are stealing intellectual property and sending it back, and are indoctrinating students in anti-Western, anti-capitalist ideas. And it's been happily embraced. And let me say one more critical thing about we scholars. Those of us who went the scholarship route allowed this to happen because we decided we didn't want to run the departments. We're like, I don't want to do that. I want to teach, and I want to write, and I want to research, and I want to debate, and I want to do this. So if that guy or that lady over there wants to be the dean, I'll let them do it. Well, we've been doing that now for 4 generations in a row, and they've completely captured our administrations. We no longer have scholars who are also leaders in the communities to which they belong, and that was a huge mistake. That was a huge mistake.
Well, the administrators took over everything. I think it was Lenin that says the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will hang them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we have done it. And I take responsibility for it myself, because that was my attitude coming out of grad school is, no, I don't want to be the program director. I don't want to be the the dean of this or the dean of that. I don't have, in fact, we would look at those people and say, oh, he went over to the dark side. Oh, he must be doing that because he can't get his scholarship done and they just want to be our bosses because they can't compete with us. Well, that kind of vanity has not served the university well, and it has not served us well, and it's damaged our students. And so I personally want to apologize to everybody for that because that was a mistake.
You know, Gregory, I find that people who are pure of heart find it very difficult to be in administrative positions, or they don't have I shouldn't call it drive, but they don't have the need to control others. And maybe that's really what it is. Gregory, this interview has been so much fun, and I only have a last couple of questions for you. And the first one being, where do you feel the future of our nation is headed? Is there still hope, or are we peering into the abyss?
No, you mentioned that you have children. I don't know how old they are, but I have a saying, the next generation has already settled all of the arguments their parents are still bitterly bickering about. And if you watch the way, politics is downstream from culture. So when my Marine son was in middle school, I asked him if he did Facebook or any of that stuff. And he said, no. And I said, why? He said, because why would I want some girl in the cafeteria talking about the fact that I like this or I like that? And so I was like, oh, Facebook is over. And I was right. Now Facebook is degenerated into a place for old people to post pictures of unicorns and bunnies and their grandchildren. And young people don't use it at all. They don't use Twitter either. They've moved over to Instagram. They're using TikTok, much to my chagrin. Mm-hmm. And so there is always hope. I am absolutely confident that the next generation will begin to see these things for what they are, and they will rebel against them. It will take time, but the end is not near. And I do think that they will start demanding, like you said, the higher institutions of education to become big business. The federal government has thrown so much money at them that the rise in all it's done is encourage chancellors and administrators to try to capture as many of those federal dollars as they possibly can. And the way to do that is to raise fees and raise tuition. It's insane. So the model itself, this is the thing that you and I know. You can't fool reality forever. At a certain point, reality comes crashing back in. And that does mean that we have to go through some uncomfortable times, which I think we're going through right now. So I do think there is hope.
Now, do you have a final message for the audience of the AJ Steele Show?
My final message, I suppose, would be don't give up hope. And, embrace the idea, we keep being pounded with the idea that we have to embrace diversity. Well, let's include in that diversity of thought, diversity of belief. We live in a pluralistic society where it is possible for us to disagree and still sit down and have a beer with each other, because at bottom, we hold certain truths to be inalienable. And I think that we're going to have to, guys like us, I think, are going to have to push back and say, all values are not the same. And the ones that we embraced, that we call the United States of America, it's absolutely appropriate for those to be the ones that are publicly promoted as a foundation, not to the denigration of other belief systems, which ought to also be taught, which, going back to what I would like to see in universities, university students should be confused because they're filled with people who don't agree with each other. But we've been sold on the idea that science is by consensus. Our culture is riddled with a bunch of theoretical lenses that if you look at, if you think about Karl Popper, are completely unfalsifiable. Marxism is unfalsifiable. You can't find an instance of, so it's not scientific. What I mean by that is that you can't prove that all swans are white, but you can falsify that they are if you find a black one, right? But Marxism, or CRT, for instance, if I say I'm not a racist, the answer from CRT is, well, the reason that you say that is because you are racist. Right. So Popper would say that's pseudoscience. That's not true. Science advances by disagreement, not by consensus.
Correct. And I believe that we have to hold on to some basic principles and truths that are not negotiable. And I believe that not everything is equal. Not every culture is equal. Some are superior, some are inferior. Not all nations are equal. Some are great, some are failures. there's philosophies that are better than others. And there's certainly some governments and systems that are vastly superior to other governments and other systems. Hopefully we can get back to that. So we have to have some kind of a centrality without losing respect for the outliers. Gregory Borse, I had a wonderful time talking with you, and I really appreciate you coming on with us, and I hope you continue to inspire young minds for many more years to come.
All right, and I appreciate your having me, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
All I really want to be is a guy that gets the girl. All I really want to be. All I really want to be is a guy that gets the girl.
The A.J. Steele Show, copyrighted 2022.